promising news on a coronavirus vaccine as the head of the CDC issues a dire warning about what the fall will look like in this country. Another streaming service, this one from NBC, is free. And if you have two different size feet, now you can get two different size shoes. We'll tell you how. Here's what you need to know. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need2Know podcast for Wednesday, July 15th. I'm Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Carlo, I wanted to lighten it up with our cold open this morning with the shoe tease.
We could use it. It's man, the last couple of weeks have been really hard to take, right? Just I feel like we're almost back to where we were, just in terms of like just feel. I just personally feel so sort of depressed. I don't know if other people do too, but just by the news.
I think it's hard not to these days. But before we get to the depressing stuff, we do have an important update on the vaccine front for coronavirus. And this time it's actually promising. Moderna has announced that phase 3 trials for its coronavirus vaccine are going to start on July 27th. Moderna would be the first biotech company to give a date for these clinical trials, a sign that the experimental vaccine appears to be safe and effective in early testing. Moderna says phase 1 trials of its vaccine induced immune responses in all of the volunteers who received it. They say the side effects were overall pretty mild. There were a few severe side effects with some of the higher doses, I believe. But it's a small trial, so a lot remains to be seen. But at least there's some progress.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the first U.S. vaccine candidate to publish results in a peer-reviewed journal also, which is where it made these announcements, the New England Journal of Medicine yesterday. Phase 3 trials, they're the big ones, right? They're sort of like the last step before FDA approval. This one's going to use 30,000 volunteers. This is phase 3 is where vaccines fail, where drugs fail, right? I don't mean to be sort of Debbie Downer here, but I'm just trying to manage expectations. Most drugs fail in phase 3 trials, and phase 3 trials also take usually a couple years. Now, I don't think that that's going to be the case this year because there's just so much interest and so much work being done on these. But just manage your expectations, folks. Like there will be days in the coming months where we get bad news about one of these vaccines. It didn't work or something. It'll crash the stock market for a couple of days. So just be prepared for that to happen. I still personally feel very optimistic about this, and this is, like you said, very good news on the vaccine front.
For me, my biggest concern about the vaccines, are going to be the distribution of it. Are we going to be able to, as the federal government or whomever is overseeing it, going to be able to adequately get the vaccine to people who need it? And when we talk timeline, I'm not as interested in the phase 3 trial or when it gets approved. I want to know when it's going to be in my doctor's office or when I could go to CVS to get it, because that's the date that matters to me.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's because that means people will get it, won't get this herd immunity. The other thing that I'm concerned about with the vaccine is what we're hearing now is that, the whole idea of these vaccines is that they produce antibodies that are similar to the antibodies in people who actually got the virus. But now we are starting to hear more about, as this virus is around longer, and we know the longer term effects, that the antibodies peak about 3 weeks after you get the virus or you recover from the virus, basically a short time after you get sick, and then really start to go away or lessen in your body. So the thinking is now that perhaps you can get this twice. So what does that mean? How long will this vaccine last? Do you need to get it every year? Do you need to get it every 6 months? I mean, who knows? So that to me is the bigger question about the vaccines, which have always thought that, it was always thought that was going to be a silver bullet in the fight against coronavirus.
It won't be. It'll be much more complicated than that. And I think you're absolutely right, Jill. And the antibody stuff is a little bit scary, I will admit. That said, I think that it's entirely possible that this disease, when we look back on it, will sort of end up being kind of like the flu, in the sense that there will be these different strains. Maybe there's sort of like you go in and you get your flu shot every year, you get your COVID shot, maybe you need a booster after a couple months. That's not a it wouldn't be great now, because just a booster shot means that you essentially have to double the production of the actual vaccine, right? But down the line like that, we're going to have to live with this thing. I think. I don't think that there's going to be this silver bullet. You take a pill or you take a shot one day and it's just, we can just put this whole miserable experience behind us. But yeah, that's what I had to say.
There was a squirrel in Colorado on a tangent that like they found out had bubonic plague, and it was like
Saw that,
somebody
yeah.
posted it was like only in 2020. And I'm just thinking, that of course was wiped out. What,
The
50
best
million people?
Yeah,
I
the
don't
best
know.
only in 2020 story that has to do with rodents from this week is the story that I read in one of the New York tabloids about how the rats in New York City are so starved for garbage because the restaurants have been closed, that they're now attacking people who are sitting outside, eating on the street. And there's all these people that are complaining about, they're having their nice
Oh my
sidewalk
gosh.
dinner, and like these massive, like, starving rats are coming up their legs. But
Nothing
anyway, yeah,
kills the mood like
yeah,
a rat.
seriously, right?
And also the West Nile apparently in mosquitoes in New York again, which in any other year would be like the front page story
Yeah, sure.
because of how dangerous West Nile is. Anyway, um, sorry, it just a
That's all right.
total. This is 2020 for us. All right, travelers, meanwhile, from 22 states now being told to quarantine or face heavy fines if they come to New York, New Jersey, or Connecticut. So the tri-state area worried about getting caught in a second wave of infections brought on by outsiders. Florida, meanwhile, the death rate there is now trending up following a spike in hospitalizations. The CDC director, Robert Redfield, warning that this coming fall and winter are shaping up to be, quote, one of the most difficult times we've experienced in American public health. How's that for a warning?
Yeah, seriously. He's probably not wrong. And remember, this is all going to happen against the backdrop of a presidential election. Also, a presidential election that isn't going to be like any other one that we've seen before. And it's going to get really dark, I think. Jill, I don't want to harp on this, but what is the federal government doing right now? Like, if I had a White House spokesperson standing next to me, I would just ask them, what are you guys doing physically to reduce the testing backlogs, to implement contact tracing in the heaviest hit parts of this country? How are we reopening schools? What are we doing about evictions and unemployment benefits ending in a couple weeks? I still, it's crazy to me that there's not actual answers to any of those questions. We just keep asking them. And where are the resignations? I was thinking the other day about how, if you remember, covering Hurricane Katrina back in 2005. Remember Mike Brown? He was the head of FEMA. He was the, heck of a job, Brownie.
Brownie?
Brownie, you're doing a heck of a job. Widely mocked and, basically just like a political hack. Who did a terrible job. But he resigned like almost immediately after that hurricane hit. He was sort of just like pushed into resignation, because that's what you do when you mess up the national response so badly. Meanwhile, we're 5 months into this thing. There's a public health catastrophe in this country. It's getting worse. Have any heads rolled anywhere? I mean, I don't know what the excuses are anymore. Ron
The
DeSantis would
excuses,
probably.
by the way, I'm just going to interrupt really quickly.
Sure.
It's not excuses. The Trump administration is spinning it that they have done a great job, that they
It's no
shut down the
shame. Yeah.
country, and that that it has been nothing but exceptional work, that the testing is great, that we're so that's
Right.
why no heads are rolling, because in the spin is we've crushed this thing. There
Right.
could
Right.
have
Right.
been millions of deaths. We've got it to, it's
No, if
that's
you're
why
if you
there's
don't
no
have if you don't have
accountability.
shame, if you don't have shame, you can get away with a lot in life, right? So I think that you're completely right about this. But I mean, I'm thinking about not even just the federal government. Somebody like Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida. This guy presiding over a utter public health disaster in his state. He seems completely incapable of doing even the most remedial work to address it. And he's not the only. I know that everybody loves to dote on Andrew Cuomo, and he's out there going on Fallon and like doing this victory lap as though 35,000 New Yorkers stores didn't die on his watch. And that sounds a little harsh, and I should cut him some slack because I don't think anybody appreciated, how fast this thing was coming uh, back in February and March. Um, but just the failure of leadership, not just in the White House but across the country, I think is really staggering. It's not new anymore. We know what we can be doing, right? We know that what we can be doing to curb this: universal masks, test and trace, quarantine the sick, remove the vulnerable from the population, move as many things outside as possible. And we just keep talking about it like it's just, this thing that cannot be done, that we're just sort of striving for. It's just so frustrating.
Um, and we failed to learn from other countries. We didn't learn from China. We didn't learn from Italy. And now the rest of the countries didn't learn from New York and New Jersey and Connecticut. We're just never kind of learning from previous experiences and constantly just thinking not us. On that note, Israel actually has seen a bit of a resurgence in cases. Obviously, nothing like we're seeing here, and they're actually pinning it to schools reopening. Some health officials there are saying, we opened schools and we really weren't ready. And that's what was behind a spike in cases, and now they're dealing with kind of like a second wave. I think it's a lesson. What did they do wrong? What did they do right? I just think it's something we need to pay attention to.
From your lips, Joy.
Meanwhile, the Trump administration is dropping a controversial policy that would have stripped visas from international students enrolled in colleges where coursework's being done entirely online in the fall, which would have put them at risk of deportation if they remained in the country. So this policy was widely criticized, particularly by one Carlo Versano here on the Cheddar Need2Know
Maybe I'm
podcast.
the one who got them to change this. Yeah.
The government was immediately sued over it. Universities like Harvard and companies like Google said it was needlessly cruel and harmful to both students and the country. So a reversal there.
Yeah, it was that, and I'm glad that they're dropping it. Thank God they are, really. Hopefully somebody with half of a brain in our government said, we don't need to fight a new legal battle for literally no good reason other than to inflict pain on immigrants, which is what this was. There's really enough pain to go around right now without this. So I'm glad that this is something we no longer have to talk about, and these students can continue their studies, which is already going to be a hard enough environment for anybody, let alone a English as a second language student who's here.
I'm guessing it was the money issue that probably drove the decision, when they realized that international students, for the most part, pay full price and full tuition for school, and make up. I forget what the number was, but it was these schools probably can't survive without international tuition, without tuition from international students. So
Right.
that may have weighed on the decision. On the political front, Jeff Sessions was humiliated in his primary bid to retake his old Senate seat in Alabama. He lost by double digits, to Tommy Tuberville, the former, I cannot speak this morning, the former Auburn football coach. So he's going to go on to face the Democrat, Senator Doug Jones, in November. In Maine, Democrat Sarah Gideon won the chance to take on Republican Senator Susan Collins. This is going to be one of the most closely watched races, and it could determine which party controls the Senate.
Yeah, Maine is definitely the one to watch. I think Alabama's probably going to go Tuberville. I always think it's Tuberville. This guy has a great name, by the way. Tommy Tuberville.
I feel like I've heard it both ways, and I didn't know which way to go with it.
That's a great name. Anyway, he's probably going to beat Doug Jones. But Maine, keep an eye on Maine. This is also a big win for President Trump, is with regard to Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions. I almost feel bad for him. This guy had been in politics forever. He was one of the first people to jump on board the Trump train back when everyone was making fun of Donald Trump for even running for president, and that allowed him to become attorney general. He then faced the wrath of the base when the president lost faith in him over his recusal in the Russia investigation. So his career effectively over. The president gets a little win here, but yeah, keep an eye on Maine. That's going to be one of the big ones in November.
Meanwhile, Airbnb getting ripped over this new tool that encourages users to send kindness cards and cash donations to hosts whose homes that they've stayed in, if the hosts have been impacted by the pandemic as the travel industry has been decimated. Airbnb does not say how many of its hosts have multiple property listings, but has acknowledged that there has been an increase in what it calls professional hospitality entrepreneurs.
Is that not a great euphemism? A professional hospitality entrepreneur? What does that even mean? But
Yeah, it means they're running a lot of homes on
yeah,
Airbnb and pretending
right,
that they live there.
exactly, right. I mean,
Or
that is
not
what it is.
pretending, just they're running these homes.
Right. I mean,
Whatever.
look, the whole thing about Airbnb, the Airbnb pitch back in the day was like, you have a house, maybe you have an extra room. Maybe when you go on vacation, you can rent that room out, or you can rent your house out to somebody else, and it's sort of like this home sharing thing. It is not that anymore. It's basically just a gigantic, platform for, for the travel industry, for landlords. I was actually trying to find out last night how many hosts on Airbnb have more than one listing, and which would denote that they're essentially, big landlords that just use Airbnb as like the tech platform for renting out their properties. Airbnb doesn't say they're they're a private company, so they don't really have to give out any of that information. But those are people who overextended and they bought up a bunch of apartments or houses to rent out. They sort of saw this as like a lucrative business. I have no sympathy for them right now. In the same way that, Jill, I had no sympathy for people who bought people who were making $50,000 a year in 2007 and bought $1 million house, with no money down on a teaser rate, right, and then had to walk away when the housing bubble burst. Like, this is how capitalism works. Like, I'm sorry, but you took a risk and you lost. That's not to say that there aren't landlords who are in a serious pickle in this country right now. As people are, tons of people just aren't paying rent, can't pay rent. But I think it's very important to remember there's a big difference between somebody who is sort of, maybe they've inherited their family's townhouse and they're renting out the garden apartment to help them pay their mortgage, and somebody who has 20 houses in some beach town and is just printing money off of these short-term rentals.
I also think that Airbnb is that business model is one that will probably do better after the pandemic and during it, because a lot of people don't want to stay in hotels, still want to get away. So I
It's an
think
interesting
that
question. I
there
haven't
was
thought about that.
probably a downturn. Like, I've seen the CEO interviewed before, and I mean, now there's even talk that Airbnb, it was supposed to go public. And I know there's a
Yeah,
difference between the company and the people who rent their
sure.
homes on it. But Airbnb was supposed to go public in this then didn't, because this time is so crazy. They made a lot of cuts. There's an argument that that company is going to come out stronger because of all of this, because they were forced to kind of make these cost cutting measures, and people are going to want this kind of travel experience where they don't want to stay in hotels and they want to just go and maybe clean. Like, they could almost, their Airbnb has instituted some I think a way to tell if the house has been cleaned or whatnot. But even if you go to a home and you kind of clean it yourself, at least you know that it's just you there. I mean, I know a lot
Right.
of
You're
people
not
who
in
are
a
doing
lobby,
Airbnbs this summer.
elevators. Yeah, I think it's. I mean, I'm in one right now. I mean, I don't think it's actually an Airbnb, but it's one of these short-term rentals. But I didn't think about that, Jill. But it's an interesting theory. I mean, look, one of the fascinating things about the world we're living in right now, to me at least, is just sort of thinking about what the world's going to look like on the other side of this. And the travel industry is one of those ways that we just don't. Nobody knows, right? That it could look so different. Things could go back to normal. We really don't know. But
So
it's
I
interesting to think
interviewed
about.
On that note, I'm sorry, and I know where I don't want to digress too much because we have a lot to get to, but I also interviewed yesterday on Cheddar the CEO of this company called App in the Air, and we were talking about how the travel industry is going to change. And one of the things he said is that, like, we think remote work is so bad for the travel industry because business travel is way
Yeah.
down, right? So nobody's going to these conferences and whatever, and that is definitely true. But he said because you can work from anywhere now, a lot of people are able to travel. And you right now, Carlo, as I look at you on this, screened in porch
Yeah.
on the
Right.
east
It's
end of
great.
Long Island, are the perfect example where, because now you can work from anywhere, it opens up the door for travel. Like, you could travel somewhere for a month and work
Right.
from there, and you don't have to be home to work, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating stuff. All of this.
So it's not that people right now travel is down, but just say going forward, are people going to travel less, or perhaps they may travel less for work, but they might travel more and just work from wherever they are.
Right.
Okay, that hurt my head. Okay. On the entertainment front, there's another streaming platform launching today. There's a catch. It's free, mostly. It's Peacock. It's from NBC Universal. It goes live with 20,000 hours of content, including its flagship first original series, Brave New World. Um, One of the things with Peacock is that they were going to have a lot more original content, but because of the pandemic, they weren't able to. So they are focusing, I think, more on like the nostalgia of older shows,
Yeah,
just
right.
because of just the world we're living in right now.
So they're going to be home to like Parks and Rec, 30 Rock, Everybody Loves Raymond. That'll be on the free tier. I think it's very smart. That show, by the way, Brave New World from the Aldous Huxley book, getting very mediocre reviews, which is too bad because it actually looked kind of good. But I do think that this is a smart move to keep it keep it free, and just do it ad supported. Because I mean, Jill, I don't know about you, but like I don't think there's any family in America right now that is just like, I need to add an extra 10, $8 or $10 to my like monthly nut in terms of another subscription. I think people are just like major subscription fatigue. So I think that this will be smart, and I think it probably has a pretty good chance of being a success.
Me too. I'm definitely going to check it out. And finally, Zappos is testing a new way to sell shoes, allowing customers to buy a pair of shoes in two different sizes or even a single shoe at a time. So this Zappos is owned by Amazon now, and they say this pilot program is aimed at amputees, people with different sized feet, or anyone who just has non-traditional footwear needs. I
I
have
love
two
this story.
different sized feet.
Do you? Like
Yeah, my
notably?
right foot is much some shoes it makes a difference. Like some shoes, if they were just gonna fit, the right foot would be too tight. I
Really?
don't
Wow, I
think
didn't
it's
know that
enough
about
of
you.
a difference to get two different size shoes. I don't think it is, but
Yeah.
um, I'm curious to see how sales are. I think this is a
No,
great
this
idea.
is actually apparently this is actually a very a growing industry, and it's all about inclusivity, which is cool. So I think Zappos is a cool company, even though they are now owned by Amazon.
I
They have
like
really good,
that caveat.
but they have great customer service. My mother and Zappos have a very complicated relationship, because she now buys all of her shoes there, but then she returns them because it's so easy to return them. So there's just, at my parents' house, there's just constantly boxes, like opened and unopened boxes from Zappos. But hey, that's why Amazon bought them, right? It's the customer service that people like.
All right, everybody, that's what you need to know for Wednesday, July 15th.
Thanks, guys.